Hello, it's Kristen Forster here. Just wanted to take the opportunity to welcome you on board for the Words to Live By programme. So we've got 10 weeks ahead of us. 10 weeks actually is, of course, quite a long time. So I do appreciate that not everybody, and perhaps most people, won't be able to make every single week. But the good thing is, because of the way we've done this with you signing up, you will get you'll get links following each week when we've loaded the recordings from the session, so you can watch them in your own time. So in particular, I know there's a home group up in Crewe, or at least a church group up in Crewe, I should say, who won't be watching every single one, but won't be able to be live with us every single week, but we'll be kind of catching up as we go along. And that's the fantastic way we're doing it. But I'm really looking forward to the interplay as well. There's nothing quite like live teaching, and there is a degree to which Zoom isn't quite like live teaching either. But that actually it is nice to kind of get that two-way flow. So there are a few things that we'll be doing to try and make it more than just me presenting. Although I have to confess, once you sit down in this room and I start talking, it's sometimes difficult not to stop. But please feel free to interrupt. But there are some kind of course etiquette things which is probably worth covering. So on the whole, it's good if you can kind of mute yourself so we don't get unintended background noises. We've had all sorts of those things in the past. And if you want to ask a question, you can always unmute yourself and then interrupt. But we'll also be taking questions or taking feedback and kind of interaction via the use of a little app that you can access on your phone. So while we're running the program, you'll be able to you'll be able to scan a code at the beginning of the program, and there'll be some questions that come up, and you'll be able to answer them via your phone, and we'll be able to watch your feedback kind of popping up onto the screen. So there are things like that you can do. But as I say, try to kind of mute it as you come on. Oh, just another thing, we will be sending out notes at the beginning of each week in preparation for the session that's coming. So you can print them out, which means you don't have to scribble kind of furiously. But equally, it saves. I know sometimes people take photos of the screen. If you know that you've got notes, you don't need to do that, and that just kind of also helps maintain those levels of privacy. Just so you're aware, the recording we do won't actually probably include your face if it pops up on the screen, as that often happens in Zoom. But we probably will be able to hear your voice. So just if you want to participate and you don't ever want anybody else to know who you are, find a different way of asking a question. That's perhaps the best way of saying it. So what have I covered? So we're going to do some interactive times. We've got the ways of responding. There will also occasionally be videos to watch in between time, which will kind of get you thinking a little bit, or maybe they will follow up some issues that we've raised in the context of the teaching, and you want to look at them a little bit more deeply. So we'll send you some of those links as we go. Just a quick. And of course I ought to talk a little bit more about the structure of the evening. So the main thrust, we're in the Sermon on the Mount, as you can see by the graphic behind me. You can see all those crowds coming up. It's not actually crowds, of course, that go up at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, although they're there by the end. That's kind of more of a literary device. We'll understand some of those things, the way that Matthew has kind of structured the gospel, structured his narrative. But the Sermon on the Mount, which he kind of places right at the kickoff of Jesus's public, itinerant and corporate ministry, where he's travelling with the 12 for the first time. Matthew places the Sermon on the Mount there, and yet it's representative of Jesus's kind of discipleship program as he's worked it through with the disciples. And Matthew gives us the best overall presentation of that program. We get another hint of it in Luke's Gospel, which we sometimes refer to the Sermon on the Plain, which is from the same period, but it's slightly structured, positioned slightly differently by Luke. John actually gives us a kind of a more of a headline and perhaps sometimes theologically deeper perspective on what Jesus means by training and development. But Matthew's Gospel gives us this fantastic section, which for me, undoubtedly, is, if you like, the pinnacle of the Gospels, which are themselves the pinnacle of the New Testament. And of course, the New Testament is the pinnacle of the Scriptures. So it's kind of, we're kind of gradually going up the mountain as we come to the Sermon on the Mount. Here is Jesus. And Matthew starts his Gospel by saying his disciples went up to him. Jesus goes out to that quiet place. They come to him. By the end of it, there's a crowd there. And so we're going to look at it in quite some detail. We're going to look at it particularly from two angles, which probably you're aware of, because I think I said this when we sent out information to invite you to be part of this course. One is to look at it in its Jewish context. It's interesting, I realised after a while how little I'd actually seen that taught on in Christian churches. We have an awful lot of opinions of what things mean. But actually I was surprised as I kind of started to read a little bit more around the rabbinic literature, not because the rabbis were a good model for how to teach, but they help us to understand the context into which Jesus teaches. And so we'll actually find there are quite a few references that are particularly relevant to the Sermon on the Mount. So just today I was just kind of making notes in another program I'm doing where we're working through Matthew on the phrase salt and light. And salt of the earth, and actually the concept or the idea of salt that's lost its saltiness, actually we find being referred to by another first century rabbi. So just a little kind of throw in there. So we'll pick up some of those bits of teaching from the Jewish rabbis, which give us some context and help us to understand what Jesus did mean and what he didn't mean, or help focus what we think he probably meant. But the thing that I find really fascinating is the genius in what Jesus teaches is that there are still things that are being discovered today. So when Jesus spoke his words, he was aware that Rabbi Hillel had said, you should love your neighbor, but you can hate your enemies. And so when he says you should love your neighbor, but you love your enemies as well, he's actually very deliberately going further. He's taking that teaching onto a new level. But Jesus, while he would have understood it in terms of its developmental impact, there are things that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount which we're only uncovering today. It was back in the 1990s, so just over 20 years ago, that psychology started to shift its emphases from looking at psychosis and when things break down and go wrong, and start asking the questions: what's really good for the way you live? What makes for human well-being? And in actual fact, one of the things we're discovering is there are huge numbers of things which Jesus addresses through the Sermon on the Mount, which are directly applicable to living well. And the reason I flag that is because so often as we've approached the Sermon on the Mount, I've thought to myself, well, this is teaching that's quite tough. It's morally very tough, isn't it? You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I can give that one, no problem there. But you shouldn't look at anybody lustfully. Oh, not so sure. Sorry, nobody wants to go on this course now. I've just said that today. But anyway, but you get what I'm saying. It's a tough thing. But actually, I realise now it's much more of a direction setting. But there is something, even when Jesus says that as we unpack the whole role and issue of how we start to imagine to start with, and the process and the way it leads and so on, that we can say more and more about. And yet what Jesus says is perfectly consistent with what modern science is showing us about the way the human brain is made and the things that can lead us into destruction or lead us into life. And so the Sermon on the Mount really is Jesus' big Moses moment. He's gone up the mountain, and here are his 8 Beatitudes, not 10 commandments. His 8 blessings, and actually as we unpack those week by week, so week 1 we'll look at the introduction section, then we'll spend 8 weeks, so that takes us up to 9, running through the follow-on material and looking at how it relates and unpacks those Beatitudes. And then in the final week, the 10th week, we'll really get to see how Jesus ties it all together, and we'll kind of leave ourselves and think about what we can do, how we can internalize this, and take these concepts that have been at the heart of the Christian faith, at the heart of the practice of the Christian faith. And that word practice, which we discover is key to salt not losing its saltiness, which is right at the beginning, probably week 2 of what we look at. That actually there are things to put into practice, not just to mentally assent to. So I've spoken too long anyway, but I'm delighted to have you joining us. from Tuesday the 21st, from 7:30 in the evening. You'll have had some notes beforehand if you want to print them out. There might be some things in there that you can have had a look at to get your mind into gear as we start off on this journey together. But I really do pray that you get a huge amount out of this. I get a huge amount out of talking about the Beatitudes, talking about the Sermon on the Mount. It's such a fundamental message, and it's the kind of the foundational one which then makes sense of some of the things which we sometimes prefer. We like the parables of the kingdom, but you can't really understand the kingdom until these things have started to hit you on the inside. So please join me. It'll be fantastic to see you. But I'll let you get on with your week, and I'll see you in a week's time. See you then.